Imagine a figure who didn't just operate within the shadowy world of organized crime, but actively um, tore down its established rules.
Yeah, someone who defied the most powerful syndicate.
Exactly. And built an empire that, well, it really captured the world's attention. A man whose audacity was matched only by the sheer kind of unsettling innovation of his methods.
A truly unique figure in that world.
That's who we're diving into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a deep dive into the extraordinary and frankly controversial life of Frank Lucas.
Right, the American criminal who really rose to prominence as a heroin trafficker in, the 1960s and 70s Harlem, New York.
That's the one. Now, you might know his story from the 2007 film American Gangster,
Mm-hmm.
but we're aiming to go, far beyond the silver screen.
Mm-hmm.
We want to explore the factual nuggets from the sources you've provided, really get to the core of what made his story so compelling and impactful.
And our mission today really is to unpack Lucas's truly unique strategies, how he fundamentally rewired the traditional mafia's supply chains, which was just wow.
Incredible, yeah.
And his audacious, sometimes deeply unsettling smuggling methods,
Mm-hmm.
plus, the lavish lifestyle his illicit gains afforded him.
Can't forget that part.
No. And the surprising twists in his downfall and eventual release. So we'll look at not just what he did, but maybe why it mattered and how his story continues to resonate even decades later.
Right.
What's particularly striking, I think, is the sheer audacity of his approach. That really set him apart in an already dangerous and, let's face it, cutthroat criminal landscape.
Definitely. And just to be clear for everyone listening, this entire deep dive is rooted in a comprehensive look at a source titled Frank Lucas, Drug Dealer's Story. That's Jimmy Scrudastucha, and got it, the Jimmy's gone, which meticulously details his life from his incredible rise to his eventual arrest and release.
A really rich source for this.
Absolutely. So let's begin by understanding the man behind the legend. Before he became this notorious name, splashed across headlines and movie posters, who exactly was Frank Lucas?
Mm-hmm.
What does our source tell us about his origins?
Well, our source tells us Lucas was born in North Carolina back in the 1930s.
Okay, the rural South.
Exactly.
Great.
And this origin point is, I think, pretty crucial because it sets the scene for a man who would eventually migrate from that background to one of America's most vibrant and, at the time, tumultuous urban centers. Harlem, yeah. He emerged as a major heroin dealer there during the late 1960s and early 1970s. And Harlem wasn't just like a location for him.
No, it was his base.
It was the vibrant yet economically challenged epicenter of his operations. You have to think about the era, right? The backdrop of significant social change, civil rights movements, widespread economic disparity, and, unfortunately, a growing demand for illicit substances in these urban communities.
The perfect storm, almost.
It really was. This convergence created a unique, maybe even fertile environment for someone with Lucas's particular blend of, ambition and ruthlessness to thrive and rapidly establish a foothold in the underworld.
And understanding that initial context is so vital, isn't it? Because it highlights just how audacious his ambition really was.
Absolutely. The prevailing criminal landscape at the time was almost entirely dominated by the Italian-American mafia.
They ran everything.
They controlled everything, especially the drug supply chains, through this complex, deeply entrenched system that had been perfected over decades. Their network seemed unshakable. Their power felt absolute.
So Lucas wasn't just another dealer trying to get a piece of the action.
Not at all. He was an innovator, maybe a disruptor, who explicitly sought to overturn this established order. And this makes you wonder, right? What motivates an individual to directly challenge such a powerful, entrenched system, knowing the extreme risks involved?
Death, basically.
Pretty much. It wasn't just about making money, though that was obviously a huge part of it. It seems it was also about seizing control, establishing a new paradigm, fundamentally rewriting the rules within that underworld.
So his ambition wasn't just to play the game.
No, it was to dominate it. And that required a direct confrontational challenge to the existing power structure, which is just...
Okay, so this is where the story gets really compelling, like you said. Lucas didn't play by the established rules. He completely rewrote them. How exactly did he manage to sideline the, formidable Italian-American mafia? What was his unique business strategy?
Well, traditionally, drugs move through the mafia's network like a complex layered bureaucracy.
Right. Lots of hands involved.
Exactly. You had multiple layers of middlemen, importers, wholesalers, distributors, street dealers, each taking their cut.
Which adds cost.
Adds cost and inevitably reduces the purity of the product because everyone's cutting it down before it reaches the street.
Diluting it.
Diluting it, yeah. This was the accepted, if incredibly inefficient, way of doing business in the illicit drug trade back then. It was slow, expensive, and ultimately delivered a weaker product.
Okay, so that was the standard. What did Lucas do differently?
Lucas, and this shows his keen understanding of market dynamics, saw an opportunity for radical disruption.
Yeah.
His strategic move was brilliant in a criminal sense. He bypassed this traditional supply chain entirely.
Just cut them all out.
Completely. Instead of going through mafia intermediaries in the US or, Europe, he went directly to the source.
Where was that?
Straight to the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. Our source specifies its location, the border region of Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar.
A notorious major narcotic production hub.
Exactly. And this direct procurement was revolutionary because it gave him two immense advantages that effectively, blew the mafia's business model out of the water.
Okay, so what were those advantages?
What's fascinating here is how Lucas applied principles you might see in legitimate business, supply chain optimization, vertical integration, but, in a highly illegal context.
Right. He wasn't just showing up with a suitcase full of cash, presumably.
Oh, definitely not. To achieve this direct sourcing from the Golden Triangle, Lucas had to establish intricate contacts. He had to build trust with local warlords and producers in a region far removed, geographically and culturally, from Harlem.
That sounds incredibly complex and dangerous.
It absolutely was. It involved navigating complex political landscapes, setting up incredibly elaborate, covert international money transfers to fund these massive purchases.
It's huge amounts of money.
Millions. And creating a logistical network robust enough to withstand scrutiny across continents. It was basically a global supply chain, meticulously managed, designed to deliver a product no one else could match in purity or price.
Okay, so that leads us to the first advantage, the product itself.
Yes. He was able to offer what he famously branded Blue Magic.
Blue Magic.
Yeah, it was a heroin product of exceptionally high purity. Our source explicitly states this purity was far superior to what was typically available on the market at the time.
So people noticed the difference immediately.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine the impact. Consumers were used to heavily cut, less potent product, and suddenly Lucas introduces something that delivered a much stronger, more reliable effect. It wasn't just a marginal improvement. It was, like you said earlier, a game changer for users.
Wait, high purity. What was the second advantage?
Price. Critically, price. By eliminating all those layers of mafia middlemen, every single person and group that added cost without adding value to his operation.
Right. He cut out maybe 5-6 steps.
At least. He could sell this high-quality product at a significantly lower price than his competitors.
High purity, low price. That's a killer combination in any market, legal or not.
Exactly. And this combination created what the source describes as amazing demand. It gave him unmatched market dominance.
And we're talking serious volume here, right? Not just corner dealing.
Oh, absolutely serious volume. His market dominance wasn't just anecdotal. Reports and later investigations suggested Lucas was moving hundreds of kilograms of pure heroin.
Hundreds. Wow.
Generating millions, possibly even tens of millions of dollars a month at the peak of his operations. This wasn't small time. This allowed him to build a sophisticated distribution network throughout Harlem, ensuring Blue Magic was readily available and consistent.
So, as you said, it's this classic example of disruptive innovation, just in a criminal enterprise.
Precisely. Think of Lucas not just as a drug dealer, but as maybe a twisted version of a direct-to-consumer pioneer.
Like the Warby Parker of heroin. That sounds wrong, but...
It sounds incredibly wrong, but the business principle is there. Just as companies cut out layers of traditional retail distribution to deliver a cheaper, higher quality product directly, Lucas did the exact same thing with heroin.
He saw the inefficiency.
He identified an incredibly inefficient, bloated system controlled by the mafia and engineered a leaner, more agile criminal supply chain. This wasn't just about saving money. It was about market capture through superior product and pricing.
A fundamental business principle applied to the darkest of industries.
Yeah. He built a vertically integrated criminal empire that completely circumvented the traditional gatekeepers. It showed a strategic brilliance in the illicit drug trade that truly set him apart.
Okay, so he's got the product, the price, the distribution. But how is he getting these hundreds of kilos from Southeast Asia to Harlem? This brings us to the next part, and maybe the most shocking element of his story.
Yes. Every great criminal story seems to have an element of shock, doesn't it? And Lucas's is certainly no exception.
This next detail is perhaps the most infamous, certainly the most disturbing aspect of his operation. And it's something he himself claimed was true. What's the most unspeakable method he allegedly used to smuggle his product?
Lucas made a truly controversial and frankly extraordinary claim that he smuggled heroin into the United States using the coffins of deceased American soldiers.
Just let
Yeah.
that sink in.
Yep.
Using the coffins of dead soldiers.
It's horrific to even contemplate. And this wasn't just some random historical period. It occurred during the height of the Vietnam War.
Right, when thousands of soldiers were being killed and repatriated.
Exactly. A time when the bodies of fallen soldiers were regularly being brought back to the U.S. This tragic, somber circumstance inadvertently created a grim opportunity for him.
How so?
The sheer volume of military flights, combined with the understandable reverence and, crucially, reduced scrutiny given to the remains of fallen heroes.
Nobody wanted to desecrate a coffin by searching it thoroughly.
Precisely. It provided a macabre, yet potentially highly effective, cover. He claimed he would conceal the heroin within these coffins, sometimes supposedly in false bottoms built by his contacts overseas.
Contacts in the military. Or locals.
He claimed connections, maybe carpenters or others near the bases, who could modify the coffins before the bodies were placed inside. He figured, correctly or not, that very few authorities would dare to inspect them with the same rigor as civilian cargo.
Out of respect for the dead and their families.
Exactly. It was a calculated risk that preyed on national grief and reverence. Utterly cold.
This detail, more than almost any other, it just profoundly shapes our understanding of Frank Lucas, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, while this claim is widely associated with him, it's a central, shocking part of the movie American Gangster.
Very central.
It's crucial to acknowledge that its full veracity remains a subject of, let's say, historical debate.
Really? So it might not be entirely true.
Well, there are questions about the logistics, the feasibility, the sheer scale, he claimed. Some law enforcement officials who worked the case, and even associates of Lucas, later expressed skepticism about the extent of its actual implementation. Did it happen sometimes? Maybe. Was it the primary method for moving hundreds of kilos? That's where the debate lies.
Okay, that's an important clarification.
But regardless of its absolute factual truth, whether it was one coffin or hundreds, it undeniably highlights a dark and terrifying side of his criminal life, as the source puts it.
What does it reveal about his character, even if it's partly legend?
It's chilling. It speaks to an almost unimaginable level of audacity, a profound ruthlessness, and a chilling capacity for intricate, macabre planning.
It wasn't just opportunistic, it was planned.
Exactly. This wasn't a desperate, spur-of-the-moment act born of necessity. It was, if true, even in part, a cold, calculated, and shocking strategy. It demonstrated his willingness to exploit even the most sacred and painful national circumstances for illicit gain.
So, this detail, whether completely factual or partially exaggerated for effect and legend.
Right. It forces you to confront the extreme measures some individuals will take in pursuit of illicit gain and power. It's not just a story of clever business tactics. It's a story of a frankly chilling lack of moral boundaries, a strategic decision that leveraged national tragedy for personal profit.
It certainly paints a picture. Okay, so he's running this incredibly profitable, albeit morally reprehensible, operation. With that kind of success, it's probably no surprise that Frank Lucas lived large.
Oh, absolutely. Understatement of the year, perhaps.
Our source tells us his illicit wealth afforded him an incredibly lavish lifestyle. Can you paint a picture of that?
Yeah, the source mentions his extravagant spending habits, acquiring expensive cars, not just one, but fleets of them, and valuable furs.
The infamous chinchilla coat from the Ali fight.
That's the iconic image, isn't it? It reportedly cost a fortune, even back then, something like $100,000. This wasn't just about comfort, it was pure display, a clear, unmistakable signal of his newfound power and status in Harlem and beyond. And he wasn't subtle about it either.
So he wasn't hiding his wealth.
Not at all. Beyond just material possessions, our source also highlights his social connections. It notes his association with celebrities and prominent figures.
Rubbing shoulders with the elite.
Yeah, he attended parties, sporting events, concerts, not discreetly, but openly displaying his immense wealth and influence. He truly embraced that Superfly image.
Right, the cultural phenomenon from the early 70s, the movie.
Exactly. Personified by the film of the same name, depicting this slick, fashionable, seemingly untouchable criminal who flaunted his wealth and operated outside societal norms. Lucas embodied this audacious, larger-than-life persona in real life.
He became a symbol of power in the streets.
Definitely. His presence at these events, rubbing shoulders with the famous, reinforced his image as this powerful, untouchable figure. This open display of wealth and influence was a hallmark of his reign, a stark contrast to the, shadowy operations that funded it.
He wasn't just a businessman.
He was a brand, a walking billboard for his own success.
And this luxurious lifestyle, if we connect it to the bigger picture, that often signals hubris, doesn't it? Overconfidence.
Almost textbook. In the criminal world, that kind of visibility almost inevitably attracts unwanted attention from authorities.
It's like painting a target on your back.
Exactly. It's a common narrative arc in the history of criminal kingpins. The very success that allows for such extravagance ultimately becomes their undoing. The flashier you are, the more visible you become.
And the more law enforcement focuses on you.
Precisely. The more intently they'll focus their resources on you. It's that fundamental paradox of crime. The drive for wealth often leads to its very public display, which then creates the conditions for exposure and capture.
So his visibility was both a strength and a weakness.
Absolutely. While Lucas's open display of power might have initially served to establish his dominance and maybe intimidate rivals, it simultaneously became his greatest vulnerability. His flashy cars, his expensive furs like that chinchilla coat.
Yeah.
That coat, seen at the Frazier Ali fight, supposedly caught the eye of law enforcement, specifically Richie Roberts, the detective who pursued him relentlessly. It made him stand out too much.
So these weren't just personal indulgences.
They were billboards advertising his illicit success, making it impossible for authorities to ignore him for long. It wasn't really a question of if he would be caught, but when. His own conspicuous consumption drew the spotlight directly onto him.
A classic tale of flying too close to the sun. Despite his clever schemes, his audacity, even the most cunning criminals eventually faced justice. So, how did Frank Lucas's empire finally come crashing down, and what was the unexpected turn his story took after capture?
Well, as we just discussed, his extravagant living and expanding drug empire finally caught the sustained attention of law enforcement, specifically a dedicated task force.
Led by Richie Roberts, who was depicted in the movie.
That's right, portrayed by Russell Crowe. In 1975, his reign came to a very abrupt end. Our source details a decisive raid on his home in Teaneck, New Jersey.
Not Harlem.
No, he'd moved to a wealthy suburb by then, another sign of his immense wealth. This raid marked the undeniable beginning of his downfall. He was immediately arrested.
What were the charges?
Primarily drug trafficking, conspiracy. The scale of the operation and the brazenness of his methods meant law enforcement had been building a significant case against him for years, meticulously tracking his illicit gains and networks. The raid itself reportedly turned up millions in cash hidden away.
Millions in cash just lying around.
Stashed in the house, yeah. So following his arrest, the judicial system moved swiftly. His conviction led to a severe sentence.
How severe?
He was handed a staggering 70 years in prison, federal and state sentences combined.
70 years.
Yeah. Our source specifically notes this as one of the harshest sentences ever given to a drug dealer at that time. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was a monumental sentence designed to, incapacitate him for life.
Sending a message.
Absolutely. Sending a clear message about the severity of his crimes and the determination of the authorities to dismantle his kind of operation.
Okay, 70 years. That seems like the end of the story. But
here's where his story takes that truly astonishing, really unforeseen twist. Despite receiving what was essentially a life sentence, 70 years,
yeah,
Lucas was released from prison after only 5 years.
5? From 70? How is that even possible?
It seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it? The reason for this incredibly early release, according to our source, was cooperation. He provided important information. He talked a lot. Information that led to other drug-related arrests, and not just small-time dealers. We're talking high-ranking mafia members and other significant drug dealers. His cooperation wasn't trivial. It was significant enough to help dismantle major elements of organized crime, including corrupt NYPD officers.
Wow. So he turned on everyone.
Pretty much. This marked a dramatic turning point where he cooperated with the law, as the source puts it. It fundamentally altered his relationship with the justice system he'd spent years defying.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? The guy who built an empire defying the law suddenly helps enforce it.
Exactly. His information was evidently so valuable, so instrumental in dismantling other significant criminal networks, that it warranted this extraordinary deal. The justice system, in this instance, prioritized the intelligence he could offer.
Over making him serve the full time.
Right. They viewed him as a key, maybe the only key, to unlocking a wider web of criminal activity and penetrating organizations, including corrupt law enforcement, that they otherwise struggled to touch.
Now, that decision, I imagine it was incredibly controversial.
Hugely controversial, while it undeniably served law enforcement's interests, leading to, reportedly, over 100 convictions.
That's a lot.
It is. But our source points out that some felt it was deeply unfair to other criminals who remained incarcerated without the benefit of such a deal. Imagine the outcry from within the prison system or from the public. Why is this major kingpin getting such leniency after just 5 years?
Yeah, it raises ethical questions about justice.
It really does. It's a tough balance for the justice system.
Yeah.
The need for intelligence to dismantle larger, more dangerous networks versus the public's demand for full, seemingly equitable justice.
And the paradox you mentioned.
It's stark here. A major criminal aiding the justice system, potentially trying to change his life, maybe just saving his own skin, but doing so at the direct expense of his former associates and competitors.
Did he face repercussions for that? In prison or after?
There were certainly threats, but he was placed in witness protection for a time, along with his family. Lucas's case became a benchmark, really, for these kinds of cooperation deals, sparking ongoing debate about their fairness and effectiveness. It makes you ask, what does justice look like when you're dealing with these huge, entrenched criminal organizations?
What happened to him after that initial release? The source seems to cover up to his release.
Right. The source focuses on the rise and fall leading to that release in 1981. But his life continued to be, well, complex. Freedom didn't last forever the first time.
He went back to prison.
He did. In 1984, just a few years later, he violated his parole. He was caught attempting to exchange a small amount of heroin and cash for cocaine.
So back to old habits.
It shows how hard it is to escape that life, maybe. He served another 7 years for that parole violation, getting released again in 1991.
So about 12 years total served out of the original 70.
Roughly, yeah. After that second release, he seemed to try to live a quieter life, reportedly in New Jersey, but he never truly escaped the shadow of his past.
And then came the movie deal.
Right, perhaps the strangest twist. He became a paid consultant for the film American Gangster, the movie based on his life. Imagine that, advising Denzel Washington on how to portray you as a ruthless drug lord.
Surreal.
Absolutely. His later years were marked by declining health, and he eventually passed away in 2019 at the age of 88. He left behind this incredibly complex legacy that still sparks debate and fascination.
A truly remarkable, if deeply troubling, life story. And that story, as you mentioned, didn't just stay in police files or court records. It captured the imagination of Hollywood.
Oh, definitely. And for good reason. It's an incredible narrative.
His life story served as the basis for that 2007 film, American Gangster, which, brought his incredible, if disturbing, tale to a huge global audience. It really embedded it firmly in popular culture.
Absolutely. The film starred Denzel Washington, who gave a really powerful portrayal of Frank Lucas.
He really captured that charisma and menace.
He did. And that performance was critical in bringing the character to life for millions who, let's be honest, might never have heard of Frank Lucas otherwise. The movie depicted the dark side of Lucas's life, his intelligence, as the source notes, and his eventual downfall.
But it presented it in a very attractive manner, didn't it? Glamorous, almost.
It definitely had that Hollywood sheen. It showed the allure of the power, the wealth, the dangerous game he played without necessarily shying away from the brutal consequences. But the compelling narrative, the strong performances, Denzel Washington, Russell Crowe, it solidified Lucas's story in the public consciousness.
Okay, but we should probably add a critical note here about the film's relationship to reality.
Yes, that's really important. Our source explicitly states that the film took some changes due to cinematic license.
Meaning it wasn't a documentary.
Exactly. It was a dramatic interpretation designed to create a compelling narrative for the big screen. Like many Hollywood adaptations of real-life stories, elements are often condensed, exaggerated, or maybe even invented for dramatic effect.
To heighten the drama or simplify things.
Right. For example, the film takes some liberties with the timelines of certain events, and the exact nature of his relationship with Detective Richie Roberts is somewhat streamlined and dramatized compared to reality.
They become almost partners by the end of the film, which wasn't quite the case.
The cooperation was real, but the dynamic portrayed was definitely Hollywood taking license. So, while the film captured the essence and the major beats of Lucas's life, it wasn't necessarily a blow-by-blow factual recounting. You shouldn't take it as gospel truth.
Good point. But regardless of its absolute factual accuracy in every single detail.
Right. The film undeniably cemented Lucas's important chapter in American criminal history, as the source says. It made him a household name.
It transformed him into a cultural phenomenon.
Absolutely. The film's immense reach ensured that Lucas's story, in some form, would be remembered and discussed for years to come. It definitely sparked renewed interest in the factual accounts of his life and the era he dominated.
And it speaks to why stories like this continue to fascinate us, doesn't it?
It really does. It's that blend of audacious crime, extreme wealth, the inevitable personal downfall, and the complex, often morally gray choices individuals make within that criminal underworld. It's just inherently dramatic.
So wrapping this up, what does all of this mean? Frank Lucas's story is clearly far more than just another drug dealer's tale.
Oh, much more. It's a fascinating, if, as you said, deeply disturbing case study. It touches on disruptive business practices, albeit within an illicit market.
The high cost of unchecked ambition.
Definitely. And the surprising, sometimes controversial, turns that justice can take when dealing with figures like him.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, what are the takeaways?
Well, his story is, I think, a stark illustration of how ingenuity, ruthless efficiency, and a brazen disregard for established norms can lead to immense power and wealth, but also to an inevitable, usually dramatic fall. It reflects that complex interplay of crime, wealth, and justice within American society. It shows how the lines between them can blur and intersect in really unexpected ways.
His ability to spot that market inefficiency, the mafia's inefficiency.
Right, and exploit it, combined with his willingness to take extreme risks, like the alleged coffin smuggling, that truly set him apart. It makes you consider maybe the shadow side of entrepreneurship. What happens when that drive, that innovation, is channeled into illicit endeavors.
Yeah, it's a dark reflection.
It is.
And his life really shows us that even with unprecedented success and cunning, the true cost of that unchecked ambition in the criminal underworld, it always comes due, eventually.
Often in the most unexpected ways, like ending up cooperating with the very system you fought against, or even having a second act, however controversial.
So it leaves us wondering, doesn't it? What truly defines a gangster in the real sense, beyond the, alluring facade of the big screen?
Right.
And what lessons can we draw from the rise and fall of figures like Frank Lucas that resonate long after the credits roll, particularly about the enduring appeal and maybe the dark lessons of the criminal innovator?
A lot to think about there, a complex legacy, no doubt.